Welcome to Class Act Coaching, a podcast for teachers and instructional coaches. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe every one of you deserves a coach. Whether you're inspiring students or guiding teachers, let our school improvement team be your coach this week. Welcome back. This is the Class Act Coaching podcast, and we've been the last few weeks in our AI series talking to Leslie Eaves, SREB's Director of Project-Based Learning and also a member of the AI in Education Commission. And as part of her role on the K12 Instruction Subcommittee, she has created a report on guidance on AI use in the K12 classroom. And that's a free report. You can go get it and download it right now. And so the last 3 weeks, we did an intro to the report itself and how you can start using AI. Then we talked about the report has 4 pillars in it. We talked about the first pillar, which is on creating cognitively demanding tasks for students in your classrooms. And then last week, we got to do a really fun one for teachers, which is pillar 2 on streamlining administrative work and planning work for teachers. And so now we're here for pillar 3, and pillar 3 is going to be on using AI to support personalized learning in your class. So I hope that you're ready for another great episode. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the interview with Leslie. Hi, Leslie. How are you?
Hi, Ashley. How are you?
I am great. Thank you again for coming back to me for another week. So much of your time you've spent talking to me, and I really do appreciate that.
No problem. I like trying to get these out into the wider universe into the education universe. So glad to do it.
And I am glad that everybody gets to hear your great ideas because you are very smart and people should know more about what you think.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But a lot of these come from like a collective, like pulling of ideas, not just mine. I'm just here to present the work.
Yeah. Well, you're very smart, but also everybody on your subcommittee is also very smart.
Yes,
so
we are very
put
smart.
It all together. So we are going to talk about pillar 3 today, which is using AI to help create places in your classroom where you can support personalized learning. Would you kind of walk me through what pillar 3 is?
Sure. It's hard to, it supports personalized learning. Basically, that's sort of, I don't know how to say it better in those words, but it is where, in a teacher in the classroom, you've got students who are at all different levels, all different, likes, dislikes, passions that they may have that, that they want to connect the learning to. And so how do you support each student when you are responsible for all students? So, AI can help that in multiple ways. And so that, the teacher can be more purposeful in working with students in small groups, one-on-one, while not allowing, where the learning can still continue, but it can also support learning at home better, especially if parents don't always have the knowledge, right, to support kids at home. You might be able to use different AI systems in order to do that. I like to use the example is I love math. My daughter does not want to learn math from mom. We've tried. I have tried. I tutor kids and she does not want to learn math from mom. And also I have a fear of writing, which seems weird because I helped to write this report, but I'm just, in all transparency, grammar rules, structure of paragraphs, trying to find the main idea, it throws me into a heart attack. Like it might, like math might throw other parents into a tizzy. So, you can use different AI tools that are there to support the learning process at home, even if the parent isn't, that isn't a strong place for the parent. Did that make sense?
That made perfect sense. I think that was a great answer. And I do want to pull something from what you said, because coincidentally, this week or last week, as part of my I'm writing a series of posts about what I learned at our coaching conference in May. And I wrote one on differentiation for coaches. So it was for teachers. It was talking about how it's just as important to do this when you're supporting teachers, because a teacher that's an advanced teacher that you're like, oh, I'm just going to let them do their own thing. They've got it. I'm going to focus on the lower level teachers that maybe are struggling right now. Well, then that teacher wants to grow and they want to improve. That's how they got to be so advanced. And they're not feeling supported, and then they leave. And then next year, you don't have that teacher that's doing so great. So that's why it was kind of the idea of it's important to support every one of your students or every one of your teachers. I feel, and correct me if you disagree, I don't think you will, that's a part of why it's important to try to find ways to support all your students. It's not just the low struggling ones. It's the ones that are like above grade level that are bored in your class because they're not learning anything. And they actually are the ones that want to be learning. And so it's not just when we talk about personalized learning, it doesn't have to just be, oh, I have these students that are struggling with reading. I need to get them up to the rest of the class. It's what can I do with my advanced students to make this better for them? What can I do with my on grade level student? What can I do with my low level students? What can I do to support every student? Is that correct?
Yeah. And I would say, I think when it comes to how we learn and what that looks like, it really is different for every kids. We can group kids. When I talk to teachers about differentiation, I also always want to be to make sure that we are differentiating or putting kids into groups based on the content that we're getting ready to do. And sometimes we can say our advanced kids are here, middle, low, but the problem is that advanced kid may have a gap of learning in this thing that we're getting ready to do. So we're just always having to be mindful about where our students are with this thing that we're trying to teach them in this moment. And AI can help support that because the students can have help right at their fingertips that's tailored to where they are particularly struggling in an area. And it might also be able to tailor a answer or a solution or an explanation to something that is of interest or that they know a lot about. It can make those connections for the student. So it can be that great thing where it can be a tool that students have at their disposal to get support in the moment while waiting on the teacher to come around and support in more, to support more directly.
And I like that because one thing that always, I'm going to say scares me. I don't know if scares me is the right word, worries me about any type of grouping of students like that. Like on one hand, I get how it's beneficial, but on the other, I'm like, oh, even if you don't call it the good group, the bad group, the okay group, like they're going to know, oh, this is a group of students that are like everybody in the class is going to see. And it always worries me that I'm basically saying, hey, class, this group over here is the ones that are struggling and don't understand the material. I like the idea that they're doing this on their own, so nobody has to know what category they're in. I'm not saying students don't figure that out anyway, but I don't want it to be because it's something I did.
Right. No, I think that's preserving ego is just a huge part, I think, of teaching, because if students start to feel like they can't do and they don't have the tools in order to do, and they get into that defeat mentality, it's really hard to kind of climb out. So using any kind of tool that can help support the students where they are building their confidence, that really is the goal, is we want students to learn how to learn while they're learning content. And we want students to build confidence in whatever we're trying to teach them and in that they can do it. Not everybody starts at different points. And that's where sometimes teaching can be very complex. I've got 20, 30 kids in my classroom. Each of them are coming with their own strengths and complexities and gaps and everything. So how do I manage that within the classroom? before AI, we certainly had tools in order to do that. But now AI can make that process go a little bit quicker and can support students in a more personalized way than other tools that may be coded, right? Programmed, again, with certain, the programming isn't necessarily tailored to what you're inputting into the system. Not quite sure how to explain it. It makes sense in my brain. So any listeners, I am sorry. I'm trying my best to understand how AI works and all that.
Well, how about, can you maybe give us some, to kind of clear up what you just said? An example might help, maybe a way that you've seen it used in this manner.
Sure. So I think one opportunity with this pillar is, and I really feel like this is where we are still in the infancy of this technology. So some of the ideas that we propose in the pillars document are things that are technology that's just now being created and may not be completely perfected yet. So I always want to have that caveat. But there are a couple things that came up in our literature that I was kind of excited about seeing, and then teachers are starting to use. So one is intelligent tutoring systems. So if I am, if I have access to this tool, and I think Conmingo might be an example of this, where I can get answers to my questions in the middle of something, right? And see an explanation and even ask more follow-up questions. So the tutoring system is helping me to learn what I'm trying to learn right now. This is great for, if you're in the classroom and we're doing some PBL work and you hit a learning, like you hit a barrier and you got to get some information quickly in order to get over it. Maybe the teacher's already covered it in direct instruction. Maybe it's a not yet that they have covered it in the direct instruction, but you need an answer now or you need support now. You can have Conmingo or other intelligent tutoring systems to help you with that. Or this could be used at home doing homework. Homework is supposed to be where students can get independent practice, where they are able to practice things without the teacher in front of them. However, that's also sometimes where students have the most difficulty because they don't have ready access to somebody who can answer questions. And parents may or may not be able to answer those questions. So having access to something where you can get some immediate answers that are correct, that are, where you can see an example, maybe tailored to something that is of interest to you, or that is speaking to how your brain works. Maybe it's able to do visual and words and something else. Then it just helps, keep pushing that learning forward. And similar to that, and this is where I'm not entirely sure this is available yet, but I did read it in the research and I was kind of excited about it, is adaptable or customizable textbooks, like online textbooks that may be powered with AI, where as students are reading and they want to see, like, hey, I need to see this in action. Maybe they type in a question and it can pop up a video that helps explain it. Or what's a follow-up resource on some more information on this battle? I'm really interested. I'm reading history, right? That they can actually get access to. So that, I guess what I'm trying to say is, instead of a textbook being this 2D window into just this thing and just having sort of text and pictures, you now create sort of this 3D learning experience where you can go more in depth into areas that might be of interest or that might help you better understand what you're reading, and then kind of go back into the textbook. I haven't had an action, but it did come up in the research. So I was like, well, that sounds really exciting.
I will tell you, I believe that fully, because I won't name the university, but where I taught for a long time, I was in charge of the textbook, and we had an online textbook for 1101 and 1102, and it was not quite where you're saying at the time that I was there. At least it's been a couple years. It could be there now, but
Yeah.
It was an interactive textbook that it was online, and it would have videos at places, and there would be stop points where you would get a question that you would have to answer in order to move on to the next part of the book. Like, it was So it's definitely moving in the direction of what you're saying. And that was a few years ago, I'm sure. And that was before the big push with ChatGPT and generative AI. So I'm sure it's only grown from when I was there, and it was already moving in that direction when I was there. So I see it definitely, if it's not there yet, being very.
It's coming. It's
Yeah.
coming. I think the other thing that when I was interviewing teachers for our vignettes that we will be publishing over the summer or in the fall on each of these pillars, and I think I talked about her or this teacher in the prior podcast, but there are tools out there where teachers can create their own chat, AI chat system that is specifically where you feed, you tell the chat system, this is what I want you to use, right? These are the resources that I want you to use. And then you can actually, where the kids can interact with the chat system while they're helping to solve the problem, but it can be a brainstormer, but it's drawing from specific resources that you actually feed it. So you can actually be able to create your own classroom specific or content specific AI chat systems where students can interact with it and they can say, well, what about if we did this? And then the chat could say, yes, that fits within this research, but have you thought about, but this might be a downfall. So you can get into where kids are getting feedback right in the moment on their ideas with something that the teacher has created, with resources that the teacher wants the students to draw from.
That sounds amazing to me, because everything, at least in my classroom, I don't know how common this is in K12, is due at midnight when it's due, on the day it's due. And I couldn't tell you the amount of times I've gotten up the next day after something's due, that last night at midnight, and I have 100 emails from students that all waited until 10:30 at night before the deadline to ask them, and I was asleep. And so now the deadline's passed. So if they had something like that for their late night questions, it'd be really nice.
Yeah.
So I have seen, and I want to know your opinion on this. Maybe it's great. Maybe there's some privacy concerns we should think of. I've heard that one way that AI can help with personalized learning is through being able to kind of put some student work in, and it'll tell you it'll do the groupings for you. It'll say, oh, I recognize that these students are struggling with this issue and these students are struggling with this, so that I can then have it create some activities for those students based off of the areas they're struggling. That sounds amazing to me, but also how do I put work in without giving personalized data?
The big caution, I would say the big caution or the big thing that you can do at any time is to take off any personally identifiable information for students. So there should not be student names. There should not be demographic information in there. You have to be very careful to just put in the student work data, if that makes sense. With one of the things that our subcommittee group has really impressed upon me, and through this work that I kind of knew was there, but I didn't really understand until doing this work. There are a lot of federal policies, regulations, laws to help protect student data. And you have to understand that the way that AI systems work is it stores all the data and it learns from the new data that you're putting in. There's some type of machine learning process that gets it up to speed, and then it will continue to learn and use the data that it's fed in order to do that, which means it's collecting data. So we have to be careful about the data that we're feeding into the system when we're doing that. And you cannot put in student information. Period. And I would just be very cautious when you're doing that. Now, that being said, it's identifying or putting, your own numbers for kids where, you on the back end, number one is this kid, number two is this kid, et cetera, go ahead. But just being very careful to make sure that the students' names, the gender, the race, anything is kind of scrubbed of that before you put it into the AI system.
That reminds me of when I was a kid. My mom would have my sisters and I wrap all the Christmas presents, and it would be in a box already, so you didn't see what it was, but it would just have a number on it, and you'd have to write the number on the wrapping paper so that she would decode it later. And So we could have been wrapping our own presents, but we never knew. You got to do that with student work.
But yes, you kind of have to do that with student work before you feed it in, and just being very careful.
One thing also, not just with data like their names, one thing that always worries me is kind of what you said, that's how AI gets the information. So if I'm feeding, for example, I teach composition. So if I put in some student work, even if I took their names off, now it has all their writing as samples. So I'm always a little hesitant about that. But I know there are some tools, I'm sure there's some specifically for teachers. I know Google's Notebook XM, it has, or at least it claims, I can't guarantee, I haven't read fully their policy, that you can use something like that. You put it in and it doesn't use it. It's only for your use. It's not
internal use. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would think that'd be something that you would want to look for in a tool. We're going to talk about your checklist at some time, but I will mention it really quickly. We do, along with the report, Leslie and her subcommittee created a checklist for when you pick a new tool to use in your classroom or school. And so I would think that would be something that you'd kind of want to think of as you're vetting, is the usage of any student work that you're putting in internal only, or is it going to be used externally?
Yes, yeah, that is definitely something that we have published as a kind of a companion piece to this, because it is super important.
Yeah. All right. So we talk kind of in general about how to personalize it for students, but I want to talk specifically about a couple of subsets of students. Is this a tool, or are there ways to use AI to help support personalized learning specifically for maybe somebody with a special learning need like dyslexia, or a behavioral issue, or autism, or I'm just trying to name all the different things that it could be, a disability, they're blind, whatever it might be for that student. Is this useful for those groups?
I am sure there is. I think, again, it's still in its infancy about what that looks like and how to use it, but you can certainly tailor different resources for students using AI. I'm thinking one about translation. So if you have a lot of ELL students in your classroom, I have known teachers to not only use this as a first step for translating, and then they can take it to somebody else in the school who will give it a once over. It just cuts down on the time for that one person, because sometimes it's one person in the school that may be able to look at the language and translate things. So it allows for teachers to be able to do that in the moment. Where dyslexia is concerned, and I haven't seen this, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that you can translate things to the dyslexic font. I'm sure it has a better name than that. I know in our household, we've used that for my daughter's ADHD, because it weights the letters at the bottom so that you're more likely to see the letters in rows and they don't dance around on the page. I think that's how it works. Please don't come at me if it's a little bit more complicated than that. But I know that it was really helpful in our household to be able to convert websites, anything that she had to read, in the dyslexic font. And so now you might be able to use AI where you can automatically translate those things where you might not be able to on certain web pages. The font didn't always work, but you can put in a text and have ChatGPT convert it for you. So I know that's sort of like very basic stuff for personalizing learning using AI, but it is certainly a great first step.
At the very least, I could see it. I know when I first started teaching and I had a lot of autistic students, and then I had for a while, a lot of students with dyslexia. And I didn't necessarily have any idea of how to do anything special for them. I just knew I wanted to. And I would have to research on my own, like, what can I do? What tips can I give them? And I would think now that this might be, if nothing else, just going on to there and being like, hey, I have some students with X thing. I want to make learning easier for them. Do you have ideas for me?
Yes.
Tiny things like, I was like, get an index card that's a bright color, and have them, for whatever reason, that helps them focus. Just tips like that I would have never known on my own.
Yeah. And with anything that's come in AI, I still think the caution would be to, yes, try it, come up with ideas, try them out. They may or may not work, right? AI, can sometimes give you hallucinations, or it can give you data that isn't necessarily supported by current research because it's pulling wherever it's pulling from. But absolutely using it to get ideas and then trying those ideas out with your students. But just don't think the AI is going to give you the magic bullet because it's there yet.
And also, I kind of look at it like how I tell my students to use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a great starting point, but then, maybe go at the bottom where the references are and find the actual sources for it. Don't quote to Wikipedia.
Yeah. And you can ask AI, what references are you drawing from? And then go to those references and make sure that the information that you're getting is legit. So yeah, you can definitely do that.
All right. So I have kind of the next two questions I have for you are on risk and cautions. This one is just, can you over personalize your learning? Is there anything that you need to use now that you have AI and you're like, oh, I'm going to create 25 different lesson plans in my class? Like, when's the line?
Well, if any of my former students are listening, they would probably say, you got to kiss it. You got to keep it simple, silly. When in doubt, don't try to go overboard with everything, but, use one tool and see how it works and see how it's supporting your students or not supporting your students. I also always recommend surveying your students. They'll give you, at least my students would, they'll give you their honest opinion. Be prepared for their honest opinion. The other thing, but where I do think we have to be very cautious is, and it's one of our cautions, is balancing screen time or over-reliance on technology.
Wait, I want to interrupt you here to just say I said I had two questions for you on risk. The next question was, how can teachers use these tools without increasing screen time too much? So I'm funny, you're already hitting it and I haven't even asked it.
Yeah, I think it's such an important part because it's with all these tools and they are powerful and they can do some really cool things and some fun things. Students still need to interact with other students. Students still need to learn how to have and hold a discussion with another human being. There is time in learning where paper and pencil is still going to be the best mode of doing that and strengthening certain skills. So we don't want to turn our classrooms where students are always in front of a screen. The screen is very two-dimensional. Even if you can go out to this wider world of, online learning and use these tools, and they're really powerful, but it does pigeonhole your focus into one area. In the exclusion sometimes of being able to look somebody in the eye and have a conversation. So I'm always advocating for a variety of engagement strategies, teaching strategies where technology is a tool, but, so are some other things. For example, in engineering, brainstorming is a huge skill students need to develop. And feeling what that looks like, a good brainstorming session. We know what that looks like, right? People are leaning in. There's lots of ideas flowing. Hey, let's do this. How about that? What can we do that? Sometimes feelings can get hurt because people are getting really excited and we're, and understanding that, oh no, that's just an idea. They're not popping me out. We're just brainstorming. So there's a lot that happens in a brainstorming session. And the best brainstorming sessions aren't necessarily done on the computer. They're done with people around a table, possibly with some chart paper or some paper on the board where we're doing quick sketches. And I still think that there's a value in that, just like there would be, I just think, there's just a value in closing down the computers because it allows for our focus, literally our eye focus, but our focus to widen to the group that we're in. The other thing that I think is always helpful in our professional development, I always like to have some time, if possible, for teachers to read current articles, research on teaching strategies, and then have a discussion about it, because we don't usually have that time in the day to increase our bucket and to consider things and to think through that. Discussion is both a learning strategy because I can externally process what I'm thinking, but it is also a way to gain knowledge by how other people are processing something. And sometimes it's an often overlooked strategy because, I know it can be very frustrating to have teenagers in particular try to stay on topic with something. But the more that we can get them to verbalize what they're thinking, to make sense of something that they're grappling with, to go from internal processing. So a lot of what you do on the computer, if you're writing or typing, is more of an internal processing mode. We need to also be able to externally process. It allows for the information to code into our brains and move from short-term memory to long-term memory, and we can make connections that way. So I don't want to have classrooms where kids are just on the computers and always interacting with the computers, especially if we're going to do pillar 1 and getting kids to do creative, innovative work on highly cognitively demanding tasks. You're going to be interweaving between computer work and, work off the screen. And all of it is important. We can't just say, well, this is great, so I'm just going to do this one thing. When we've always done that one thing, it's never worked because teaching is complex. It requires a plethora of tools, resources, strategies in order for students to learn, gain confidence, develop pride, just learn how to learn material. I wanted to have a better wrap up to that pontification, but I did not.
I liked that learn how to learn. That I thought that was good. I have something because you brought this up in one of our past episodes, and I want to bring it up again because I think that it fits here, which is the idea that not every school is going to have access to these tools. How do you just have to just use it in your classroom?
Well, I think if you have access to it as a school, I would use it. You can't worry about the schools that don't have access to it, right? In some ways that is their battle to fight. And I think collectively, I would just want us to always continuing to bring access to the latest technology into our schools. If I am able as a teacher to bring this into my school and it's gone through a procurement process and the school district wants me to use it, if you aren't there yet, don't force it. We want to use tools that that have been vetted and are in their toolbox that is blessed by their school district. We know that students are going to access these at home. That home is a place that we can't control. We can't control for what students have access for in school. So that's also why I'm always advocating for, if kids are going to use it anyway, and we can, this is an area to invest in our schools to make sure that students are getting time learning how to use these effectively, ethically, so they can use them beyond their life at school. And they're not just using them to circumvent the learning process or to make things easier, that they're using them as part of a thinking process, part of a writing process, part of a problem-solving process, that they know how it works and they're not just like, oh, yeah, AI told me it, so it must be right, and I'm going to turn it in. At some point, that's going to come back to bite you.
It actually does address the access issue in a different way than I meant it when I asked the question, because you're not having this one student in your class whose parents pay for the pro license to Chat GPT or whatever, and they're getting advanced research and all the things that the pro does. And then another student who maybe is just using the free one, which doesn't have as accurate and good information, and they're both using it, and you're not using it in class. You're not telling them to, but they're both using it, and one has a much advanced process, and the other one's more likely to get caught, probably because their information is going to be less. So I think that's a good pro for bringing it into the school in some fashion.
Right.
But we're going to talk more about the issues of ethical and proficient use next week, so I'll save that. I do want us to wrap up today, and I want to end with the same question I've asked you for every episode, which is somebody, I know it's summer, but somebody, first week of school, somebody wants to start doing this in their class. What's the first step they would do to bring in Pillar 3 into their classroom?
That's a tough one because I think Pillar 3 is so dependent on what you have available to you. I know that the teachers that I've worked with, some of the easiest places to dive in is, especially with English language learners who are maybe new to the country and are just now kind of learning English, using it as a translation device to personalize the teaching resources to meet their needs. I think that's a good first step. It might also be to look around and think, what do I have at my disposal? What, that I can use to support kids and differentiate learning in my classroom. And if there's a gap that you find, hey, here's a tool that I would like to use, I would advocate. I'd, go to leadership and see, is this something that we might be able to bring to our school?
And something you said that triggered this in my mind, again, this goes to the caveat that we said earlier that this is a good starting point, but you're going to want to verify what I'm about to say. But I remember I had a student, English might have actually been the language in her country. I don't remember where she was from, but she spoke English just fine. That was not her issue. But what I didn't know and what she didn't know is that there are different rules around plagiarism where she's from versus here. And so she technically plagiarized a lot by our rules, by American rules. And when I talked to her about it, she was shocked because she did everything how she would have done it in her country. And it might have been helpful if I had known that was even a thing, if I kind of said, what are the different rules in this country where my student is from? And so then I would kind of, so it might be a useful place to get started if you know you're going to have X amount of students from wherever to kind of see, like, what do I need to know about subject in that area that's going to be different from here.
Yeah, and with that in mind, I'm also thinking about in project-based learning, one of the things that I advocate for teachers is to create student learning profiles. I kept mine on a spreadsheet so I could easily group kids based on different strengths or based on different learning styles or whatever the project needed. But taking a survey of your kids to know how do they learn best, having them kind of be able to tell you what are things that they are interested and they know about. I mean, even things like they're football players, or I'm a gamer, or I like Minecraft, or I like crocheting. Having some of those interests will help you, even if you don't have AI at your disposal, will help you tailor the different assignments or resources.
I think that's a great place to end. We are now done with our 4th episode, our 3rd pillar. We've got one more pillar to go. And so we are going to see you again next week to talk about pillar 4, which is, as we already kind of mentioned, ethical and proficient use of AI, basically teaching students to use AI effectively and ethically. Thank you for listening to this episode of Class At Coaching, brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit SREB.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.